I don't know how many women show up in these spaces and feel empowered. Yeah. And so when we misdiagnose that or say words like sex worker, and toss that around, you're taking a lot away from the women who are survivors.
Welcome to Restorations. I'm Caitlyn McKenney, and my guests on this episode are two women who are working to help bring women out of the sex trade, out of trafficking, out of prostitution, and find hope and healing. This is such an important issue. It's something that we're hearing more and more about on the streets of Seattle right now. And it's also so relevant to the focus of this show, which is to engage with issues and policy that involve the dignity of the human person and seek to see people and cities be restored to their fullest potential. Before we hear from them, we have some important news to talk about. In case you missed it, the Supreme Court released a decision on Grants Pass v. Johnson, a huge case on whether or not cities can ban public camping. I think the decision in this case is a massive victory, both for communities across our country, but especially for the men and women experiencing homelessness on our streets. The 6-3 ruling declared that it is not unconstitutional to have laws that make it illegal to camp on the street in your city. This removes the legal barriers that Martin v. Boise imposed previously and returns authority to local jurisdictions to figure out how they want to address homelessness and encampments. Let me read you a few headlines about this decision. In NPR, Supreme Court allows punishment for homeless sleeping. CBS News, Supreme Court allows camping bans targeting homeless encampments. Cal Matters, California homeless camps, Supreme Court okays a crackdown. These are just some of the headlines I've seen, and I've also seen heated statements and posts referring to criminalizing the homeless, banishing homeless people. Obviously, this is a charged subject, and I think we need to be really clear here. The Supreme Court is saying it's not unconstitutional, it's not cruel and unusual punishment to have a public camping ordinance in your city. They're not telling you how to do it or how to do it well. And that's the whole point of this decision. That it's not the job of federal judges to decide the details of how a small town in Oregon addresses homelessness. There are bad and good ways to regulate public camping, just as there are bad and good ways to address homelessness. The fact is that now, thanks to this ruling, American cities have more opportunities, more freedom to respond to homelessness on their streets, not less. I think there are two wrong ways to view the Grants Pass decision. The first is to think that public camping bans will solve all of your city's problems in one fell swoop. And the second is to think that if your city has a public camping ban, they hate homeless people and want them to disappear. Both of those are wrong, and here's why. Banning public camping, or some variation of that, isn't going to be effective at reducing unsheltered homelessness at all unless you have the resources to use it as a tool to help people. I'm borrowing insights here from Discovery Senior Fellow Robert Marbit. The way that this is effective is if you have enough available beds at treatment programs to get people from the street straight into treatment and recovery, or you have resources to get people reunited with family where they can access treatment and recovery. But you also need enough capacity in your jail. And the idea here is that you're engaging people and giving them the choice between a program that can help them recover and successfully exit from homelessness or jail, which we know can also be a place for people to choose recovery. Just talk to the countless men and women who credit jail as the starting point of their life changing for the better. So without enough treatment and jail capacity, this kind of ordinance is not going to be useful at meaningfully reducing homelessness in your city. And the second way you can go wrong here is to think that if your city bans public camping, they hate homeless people, and that instead everyone should be able to live and sleep wherever they want to. We have so normalized people living in dangerous, unhealthy, undignified conditions alongside freeways in the middle of forests, on the sidewalks, vulnerable to a deadly drug supply, to violence, to sexual assault and trafficking. And allowing that kind of suffering to continue has just become the status quo. We've gaslit people into thinking that is not only normal, but a choice that no one else has a right to interfere with or question or reject. And so that's how you get activist groups handing out tents to keep people in these conditions. Just recently, we saw photos and videos of a 9-year-old boy living in an encampment next to the freeway in Seattle with his mom. And when outreach workers approached her, she refused anything they had to offer. Police haven't been able to do anything about this situation that we know of so far. This child did not choose to live in an encampment, and he suffers when no one in his life has the authority to get him out of that situation. So camping bans are not the shining cure-all solution. They're also not banishment either. Every city's goal should be to make it clear that being homeless here means getting immediate engagement and services, and that no one here languishes on the streets, by the freeway, or in the forest. Thank you to the Supreme Court for what I think is a just and compassionate decision on this issue, and I look forward to seeing cities use this new freedom for good. Okay, we're tackling all of the controversial topics today. You may have seen this in the news, but in case you missed it, a 74-year-old woman was killed when she was pushed in front of a train in San Francisco by a homeless man. This is the victim. Her name is Corazon Dandin. Just a tragic story and a tragic loss of life. It reminds me of a story from a couple of years ago where a woman named Michelle Go was pushed in front of a train to her death by a homeless man in New York. And I bring up that story not to suggest that we have an epidemic of homeless men pushing women in front of trains, but that we do have some serious reckoning to do with the stories of random acts of murder committed by people with severe untreated mental illness. The man in New York had schizophrenia. We don't know if the man in San Francisco at this point was diagnosed with mental illness, but I think it's fair to guess that that's the case. I read a great article recently where the author brought up a stat that is frequently used and is very deceptive on this issue. Maybe you've heard it before, that people with mental illness are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than the perpetrators of violent crime. Is this true? Yes, it is. Is it helpful? No, it tells us nothing about the relevant question at hand, which is, does severe mental illness increase the likelihood that someone will commit a violent crime? And the fact is that people with mental illness are also more likely to be the perpetrators of violent crime than the general population. The author of this article, Freddie DeBoer, makes a clever point that men are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than the perpetrators. But of course, that's entirely irrelevant to the fact that men are far more likely to be the perpetrators of violent crime than women are. No, we shouldn't stir up fear against mentally ill people the same way we shouldn't stir up fear against men, and I'm not advocating for either of those things. But when we talk about the laws and policies that address severe mental illness, we absolutely should be considering risk. It's saddening to think that Corazon and Michelle were the victims of violence that could have been prevented if the mental illness of their killers was taken seriously. There may well be way more cases than we are currently willing to admit in which taking mental illness seriously means forcing someone into treatment in order to protect innocent people, including themselves. Now let's hear from Kristine Moreland and SarahAnn Hamilton, who are part of a Seattle area outreach organization called The More We Love, providing outreach to people experiencing homelessness and to women experiencing sex trafficking. And often those things go together. Okay, welcome Kristine and SarahAnn. I have been looking forward to having you guys on for a long time, and I'm so excited to listen to you and learn from you today.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us. This is very exciting.
I just want to start first by hearing from you guys who you are, your background just briefly, and how you met and are working together and what you guys do together.
Well, my name's Kristine Moreland, and I am a mother of two amazing kids. But I've served in this space, kind of working alongside the homeless and women and children coming out of trafficking for about 22 years now. My day job used to be in the mortgage business, but I have taken a full-time leap of faith to come into the nonprofit world and serve. I have walked alongside many organizations over the years and just really tried to do my best to show up for people in these spaces. And about a year ago, I came to work for an organization that also works in stopping anti-sex trafficking. And I was invited to an incredible luncheon called Stolen Youth. And in that luncheon, I got to witness SarahAnn speak. She was the speaker of the day that day. I'll tell you, when this woman stood up and she told her story, this is kind of when I start to tear up. I was enamored with her. I could not believe that somebody had walked in the spaces that she had walked in. And when I was able to sit there and listen to her story, I was able to identify my own story, which led me to understand that I was a survivor in this space. And so, this is my partner, and I am proud to say that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my name is SarahAnn, and I am more than just a survivor. I am a mother and a wife. I have 9 grandchildren. I know that sounds crazy, but I do. I have 9 of them. I am currently serving as the director of survivor services at the More We Love. Before that, I was a program coordinator and a advocate for another organization. So I've been in the field, the work in this movement for probably about the last 5 years. But I was in the life from the age of 12 to about 35 years old. I would say that I'm very proud to be an expert in this because people need to know the truth and need to know how we can really show up for the individuals that are being trafficked or coerced or under fraud or anything like that, and how we can really show up, because there is a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it.
And if there's anyone that knows that, it's going to be you. Yeah.
Along with a lot of other survivor leaders that are in the movement that I don't think get enough attention or enough chance to speak the truth. So I think we're coming into a time where we need to give survivors places of leadership and really let them show up so that we can start doing things the right way.
And now you guys work together.
Yeah, that's the More We Love is the organization that we started, and I run it as the director right now. And in that space, it was just important for us to talk about the collaboration with the resources that are doing the work and showing up. And so we really, really work together in making sure that it's not just us. It's like she said, it's the leaders in the space. So the More We Love's premise is to be somebody's constant. It's our job to walk alongside people, not just to, as we kind of say, put them behind closed doors and hope that it'll go away. Mm-hmm. We really show up intentionally in these spaces and rise as constants.
I respect both of you so much for what you're doing. And,
thank you.
And think you have so much to offer to this conversation and to every conversation about this. Can we start just by doing basic clarifying definitions on, I hear this referenced as like the sex trade. Yeah. I know REST is real escape from the sex trade. At one time it was sex trafficking. When you guys are helping women in this space, what are you helping them come out of? Or what's the best way to define these categories,
I'm going to say one word, exploitation, but I'll let SarahAnn take it a lot further than that.
Yeah, I think that sex trafficking or the sex trade or whatever is the definition is that it's force, fraud, or coercion to commit any sexual acts. And then when we go into like minors, youth, they don't have to be forced. There doesn't really have to be a coercion because they're kids, right, and they can't decide for themselves whether that's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I think the language is, of course, important. I'm not saying it's not important, but the real thing that we need to be identifying is the trauma.
It shouldn't be the main focus is the language. Are we getting it right? We're not getting it right now because we're not doing enough.
So I think that the language is great, of course, but then when you use words like sex worker, it takes the violence out of it. When you use words like that, I don't really know what to call it, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. I know that I was affected by it my whole life, will always be affected by it, and it is my trauma that I carry. Mm-hmm. And a lot
exploitation for others' gains.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Our work at Discovery's Fix Homelessness Initiative obviously is focused on homelessness, not specifically on sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. And I know the More We Love, the outreach you guys do, it's homelessness and it's trafficking, and we acknowledge that there's a huge overlap there. Yeah. Can you guys speak to that? From my perspective, not being involved in this space, I see some just basic high-level overlap, which is, well, both of these issues are about human value, mm-hmm, human dignity, human suffering. Mm-hmm. Both
intentional resources, right? I think I'll speak into one, being somebody who is hands and feet on the street and in these encampments consistently and, taking calls from other resources. I think one thing that is really important is that we don't realize how many girls and minors are trafficked into the encampments, right? Because what you don't see, you don't see. Yeah. And so the intersection between their survival and what they have to do to be able to survive in those spaces is very, very traumatic.
Are these, when you say girls being trafficked into encampments, it's not necessarily, well, maybe it's both. Women who become homeless and are living in an encampment and they're exploited. And also women who are being trafficked separately and the encampment is being used as an environment to do that.
Yeah, both are true, but there's also survival. And I think SarahAnn has such a good conversation around.
Yeah. So when we think of course, if you've never been in it, and when we think of trafficking, we automatically think of like a girl walking on Aurora, a girl working in a hotel or a casino, a girl being kidnapped. You know, we see like this narrative that society gives us, but there's levels to this, right? When I got into the life because I was hungry. I was a runaway. I was a street kid, and some girl had money from McDonald's all the time, and I wanted to know how she got that money, you know? So a lot of people go into this for survival. Like if you don't have anything to eat, you'd be surprised what you would do. Or if you have nowhere to sleep, you would be surprised what you would do. If you are hooked on drugs and you're about to be dope sick, like these are all ways to exploit a person. So,
and then in the homeless sector, they thrive on those ways of exploitation, right? So most common are in these encampments, you will have trafficking tents, right? These areas where these women are held and being trafficked in areas that are already dangerous enough with the drug trafficking that are going on, but you'll have tents dedicated just towards trafficking these women in and out. And these women are showing up in these spaces being exploited because they're feeding addictions or they're feeding their children or all kinds of different layers, right? And so I think it's really important that when we get into these spaces and we see and identify, oh, look, there's a homeless girl. Imagine what it takes for that homeless girl to survive on those streets, or what's happening to her when you don't see, right? When the lights are off or that tent is closed. And so trafficking intersects in huge ways. It's also a way for people, that's where predators go, right? Outside community members will go in and prey on the homeless women in these encampments. And so you have to really identify that, you know, having unsanctioned encampments in these areas are certainly one of the most dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And it's also where a lot of these young girls get dumped, right? So a lot of the gang activity that takes place and when they traffic them in and when they become disposable or they're done with them, they dump them in these encampments,
literally,
right? Dump them. Yeah. And so it's not even, these aren't conversations of like, is this girl homeless? You know, like, let's get her to recovery. It's like, what in the world is taking place? Like, how many layers of trauma do we need to address before she's got any levels of stability, right?
Yeah. And it seems like, although you're saying the start may have had something to do with finances and economic reasons.
Yeah. Well, because poverty is our biggest trafficker. At the end of the day, poverty is our biggest trafficker. You know, I basically turned my first date so that I was able to get something to eat, because that made sense, because what other choice was there? I was 12 years old. I was out on the streets. So there was no other choice. That, you know, if you're hungry, you're going to do what you have to do. Now, all of a sudden, the traffickers see, oh, this girl's hungry, she needs something, so it's a lot easier to pick her up. And then now you've just learned, my narrative was like, I will always do this will be the only thing I'm ever good at.
And would you agree that while that may have caused part of it, the solution once you're in it is probably not money necessarily? Like, it's probably deeper than that. Maybe that's part of it, but it sounds like
because relationships get you in and relationships get you out. Like when I left home because of abuse. You know, I shared the same story with a lot of other girls. I left home because it wasn't safe and it seemed like the best thing to do was to leave. And then when you're out there, you're longing to belong to something. You want to be somewhere. You want to be important to somebody. And so people that don't have good intentions see that and they prey off of that. 100%. And so now I'm in this place where I'm like, oh, I'm doing good, so I get treated a little bit better. You know what I mean? If I make enough money, if I make quota, if I do this, if I do that, then I can almost have a good life. Then you start getting into resources. I was able to go into a place called Ops and was able to learn how to paint and found those same relationships But it was just the exact
a new community.
opposite.
A community of healing, right?
Yeah.
The relationships getting you out, relationships getting you in. It's the community that you had and then building a new community so that you can be empowered, right?
Yeah.
And so to be around other people that are lifting you up and going like, SarahAnn, I'm going to teach you how to paint. And then when she gets down on the paper and she's painting something, it's like, whoa, I'm worth more than just where I was. And you start to have this like hope and you feel inspired as a person, then...
And it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It happened me coming to this ops group every week and meeting other survivors that have made it out and realizing, oh, there is a chance.
Completely.
There is an opportunity.
And also having ownership of your story and your circumstances, right? I mean, I think that that's the part of this is what part in that did you play? And not saying that there's and nothing in terms of that. I'm saying in terms of what do you want in your life? What are your next steps? What are you willing to do? And then we are ready to go with you and walk alongside you, right? And I think that's the coolest thing that I learned from SarahAnn, because it's like this like energy and fire to want to do more. Like I want to go out and help this person and go do this and teach them how to paint and all that. And I'm walking behind her going, I am so inspired to help you create these spaces so that everybody can feel hopeful and more than where they were, right? And that's the part of this that, you know, when we are all working together in these spaces and creating opportunities for survivors, there's healing. There's healing in that trauma, right?
Yeah. And having someone else who's able to hope for you when you can't.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the most beautiful thing is what's transpired over the last year with our relationship, right? What she's been able to help me heal through from identifying where I was and what I can help her through. And that's that constant, right? Where you just show up for a person and it comes without judgment and it comes in a space of like, hope. And it's like, okay, we're doing this. Okay, next steps, right? And if we can show that kind of a relationship to other people and that relationships don't have to be these, you know, bad things, that they can really be beautiful. I mean, how many times do you call me and you go, girl, you know, this is what we're doing today, or these are what we get to do. It's really, really cool.
When you guys go and do outreach together, let's say you're going into an encampment, how are you engaging with the women there and showing them that glimmer of hope and relationship in probably pretty limited capacity?
Start with hugs.
And are there
sorry.
And what are are there barriers that you encounter either from them personally or their surroundings?
Yeah,
you have to be careful and respectful of the spaces and make sure they're safe first, right? Always.
Yeah. I think that people, they want to outreach, which is great. I'm not taking away the outreach, but we always have to remember that we could definitely put these women in harm's way, you know, especially if you're outreaching on a place like Aurora, to just run up on them. There's probably someone watching them. So you want to respect their space, you know. When it comes to encampments and stuff, I think it's just, you can't just outreach once a day, you know, or once a week. You have to constantly do it to where they recognize you coming in all the time. So you build this relationship with them. You're able to joke with them. I think for me,
it's a safe place. Too.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's really easy to connect with, because I've been there. I've been right where you're at. So that you don't even have to really tell me. I can look dead at you and know, this is hard.
We had an organization call us yesterday, and it took us about 10 minutes to get down there and, you know, simply meet the woman who was in a bad position of being trafficked. And we had a conversation with her, and you end with a hug, and you hold them so tight that you're like, wait, you can hug me tighter, right? Because you want them to feel a human touch that isn't something that's exploiting them in that way. And as I left, I received a text message from the resource afterwards, and it said, I've never seen her smile, right? Yeah. And all we did was tell her that she was loved. And that's where it starts, right? Remind that person that they matter, because if you don't start there, then why are they going to listen to me in the first place? And I think the other thing that's really key and important when you're doing outreach, especially for survivors, is you've got to watch your promises. You cannot walk in there and tell these girls that you're going to be able to do something and not show up in those spaces. And so like SarahAnn said, you've got to be consistently there. You need to listen to their stories. You need to understand the circumstances that brought them there in the first place. And then you really need to get intentional with working with them. Yeah. And sometimes that looks like, hey, I'm going to recovery right away. I want out. And sometimes that looks like I'm still in this life because I'm with a pimp. This is what I believe to be true. These are the things, right? And so it takes survivors and warriors to show up in these spaces and remind these women that they matter and they're loved and they're cared for. And of course, the one thing we also try and identify is, are you safe? And 9 times out of 10, what are their answers?
No.
Yeah.
So it's important to under promise and over deliver.
Sure.
That's a great way.
You know what I mean? Like, you have to be able to, because of course we want to go in there and we want to be like, we're gonna do everything.
Let's go.
But that's not reality.
Yeah.
The reality is we have a lack of resources. We have a whole community of people that it's easier for outsiders just to not pay attention to because it's ugly and it doesn't feel good and it's scary. So
Until it's your child.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's important just to show up. I mean, like me going to that art workshop, you know what I mean? It literally changed my life. And there was nothing spectacular. It was nothing that, you know, like this perfect thing that fixed it. It was just me walking into a room that had they did high heels art, and they had repainted the high heels and made these high heels into
So
something
good.
and lined against the walls, and there was poetry and there was other girls just like me. And I was like, wait a minute.
Well, and the space is for me.
Yeah, and
that's the other part,
yeah.
right? Like, this space is for me. I think that's the part where we kind of talk about the homelessness and the trafficking, right? We have resources for women that are coming out of trafficking that are called like low barrier shelters, or places that just re-exploit them, right? We just take them from one place and we put them in another, and we're like, go ahead, thrive now, or let's get out of the life or do these things, right? We have to create spaces that are intentional for the survivors coming out of trafficking.
Absolutely.
That when a person like SarahAnn walks through the door and goes, there's these high heels, right? And that you saw the smile that it changes.
Yeah.
That gives her that feeling that she matters.
And when you say that there are resources lacking, is that what you're talking about? Is resources once women come out?
Absolutely.
Or
Oh, yeah.
what else? Like,
Because it's not a one and done thing.
Yeah.
You can't just get out and then that's
You're good.
You're done. That's not how it works. Like, you have to have this community that you can continue to go to. I think Seattle Ops is a perfect example of that. They have survivor support groups every Thursday. They have yoga. They have free mental health. They have these things like this to where you know in your brain, I might still have my foot one in, one out, but I know on Tuesdays and Thursdays I can go to group.
And those are my community. That's
my community.
my
I
safe
can go
place.
in there. Those women know exactly what I'm feeling. I don't have to be ashamed. I don't have to be scared. I can just go in there and eat dinner and
be safe.
Be safe and laugh and be silly and do whatever I need to do. And so to have that in the back of your mind, that's always there, that's what saves people's lives.
That's awesome. And what does it stand for? Seattle?
Seattle Ops stands for Operation for Prostitution Survivors.
Okay.
Yes.
On kind of the flip side, government and law enforcement and policy response, what are the barriers there, and your thoughts on kind of addressing this?
Well, let me just say that
standpoint?
we are very proud to be part of an organization called Ways Forward. And Ways Forward is a legislative group of women, survivor women, that are coming in and working on policy change. I think it's very important to identify that the government is not the right people to make decisions in trafficking spaces. I think survivor voices are important in those spaces. They ultimately are going to make decisions that are going to affect, like, let's just talk about the anti-loitering prostitution law, right? We have lots of discussions around that where the government wants to enact a loitering law for prostitution. But before something like that should be discussed or talked about, it should be consulted with people who have been in these spaces, right? And if something like that happens, then what are the detriments behind it? What's the negatives? What's the positives? How do we then support the survivors if that is something that takes place, right? And so these big conversations shouldn't be done just with the government's doors closed. It needs to include these resources that are stepping up in these spaces and really understand what could happen. SarahAnn has an incredible story around what could happen when a policy like...
Yeah. So I, like I said, I was in the life for a very long time. There was a time that I was starting to get my stuff together and I wanted to go to school. So I got my GED, and then I went to Bryman. This is a long time ago. It was just Bryman, which was a medical assistant school. Still actively was working in the life while I went to school, had kids, like all that, and graduated top of my class. Did my externship, they wanted to hire me at my externship. They did the background check, and they were like, oh, absolutely not. You have prostitution cases on your record. It's a morality thing, and I still had to pay all that student. I still owe student loans on it. I still had to, and I didn't get the job. Women go through that all the time that have been in the life, not able to get apartments, not able to get jobs. And then
when they're making policy changes, do they know these stories?
Yeah.
Do they hear these type of
Yeah.
things? The
And so
repercussions?
I get what people are trying to do with the loitering law. I get it. But there's no resources to back it up. And then on top of it, why don't we hold the buyers accountable?
Right.
I've done outreach on Aurora many, many times. I've been a 12-year-old on Aurora. If you see 10 girls out there right now, I would bet my last dollar 8 of them are underage. If you want to charge people with loitering charges, you should be charging these buyers. Right. That's the morality.
Well, the government's holding the wrong people accountable. Right? And so that's the frustration on our end. So we get in these spaces where we are constantly being asked, what do we do? Or what does this look like? Or what does policy change? And we offer our voices in these spaces, and then it doesn't go anywhere. Or, it's disheartening often to work in spaces with the government. And then there are people that we do know that are working towards real change, and they are listening. And I think the time is now. And so that's why when we do the work we're doing, we just have to stay consistent, regardless of who's involved or who's not. Right?
I think it's challenging because you do, like you said, like the government has authority to enact justice. Can. Yeah. And so it seems like you want them to be involved in some level, and maybe there's thoughts that, like, if you're viewing it as like a market, to try to stop. But it gets complicated, and I can see.
Well, and a lot of buyers are men of privilege,
or in our government,
or in our
So that's the other part. There's a whole nother layer to that part, right? Yeah. And I think that's the hard part, right? Like, a lot of times these hard conversations don't take place because we don't identify where this is really coming from and the layers of all of it, right? I mean, some people have seen some big arrests that have taken place most recently, and a lot of that is coming from places of huge privilege, right? Yeah. And then you have, survivors on the other side who are trying to combat that without resources. How? How do they show up in these spaces, right? Often I'm asked questions like, well, why don't we prosecute them more? And we don't even need to get into the fact that we're not prosecuting a lot of things, but let's get into the fact that it's hard for a woman to show up in a courtroom and face these people in a room of potential other Johns or people who've already exploited them in those spaces. So how do we create safe places for these women to be able to have the same equitable spaces to be able to do these things that need to happen so that they can be held accountable, the Johns and the pimps, right? Yeah. And so often it's our Black and brown girls, right, that are being the most exploited and, not being able to show up in spaces with advocacy or people that will rise for them. And so we've got to do a better job there too.
Definitely.
I want to go back to a shocking fact that you said. You think about 8 out of 10 of the girls on Aurora at one time.
Oh, I don't think I know.
We know. Are underage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you speak to that? I mean, I think...
Pimps have a good day.
Well, and not only that, though, and most of them are Black and brown girls.
Absolutely. So, I also heard a statistic one time, and I don't ever want to speak on them, but this is a disheartening one, and I believe to be very true. So often our Black and brown girls are out there because our Johns are privileged white men who they don't want to turn and look at their young daughter in the face while they're exploiting and having sex with them. But it's okay to do it to our Black and brown girls. And that's the really disheartening part, right? I mean, there is such an injustice and imbalance here, and we're not showing up in the spaces we should be.
I think also,
when we talk about policy change, I just want to bring something up that's really important. Our group, along with our group with Ways and a few others, are working on a very important policy change that needs to go to legislation, and it's about an ebony alert. And that is where we have amber alerts and silver alerts and feather alerts, but we're missing an alert for our Black and brown girls who are the most trafficked and exploited and who go often missing in these spaces. And so we have to charge for different policies so that we can protect these girls in these spaces for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to get back to what you were talking about earlier, which is the sex work term. Okay. And I think
Go, girl.
I think,
this is a good one.
I think it is. I think just this issue, sex trafficking, exploitation, is largely everyone agrees, like, exploitation is bad. We want to fight this across the aisle, regardless of politics. People agree. But it seems like in recent years, there's been kind of this change and there's been a shift in the direction of, well, wait a second, we don't want to be judgmental and we want to accept everyone. And maybe some people are making this choice freely and we should respect that. And so sex work, we're going to broaden the umbrella so that it's not moralizing and it's not, you know, judging anyone. I think that ends up causing a lot of harm. I'm curious your thoughts on that whole movement, kind of.
I totally agree with you. So first of all, my biggest thing about the word sex work is it takes the violence out of it.
Yep.
It totally takes the violence out of it. Now, I'm not going to lie, there's a small percentage of women that are women of privilege, women who maybe have their bachelor's degree, they have are able to do this on the side. You know what I mean? That's a very small percentage, right? It's a very small percentage. Yeah. When the rest of the world is not living like that. We're not talking about that percentage of people. We're talking about the girls on Aurora right now. We're talking about those girls. And when we say sex work, we totally take the violence out of it, because whether you're on Aurora or whether you're working at a Hyatt, at a 4-star, 5-star hotel, your chances of violence are exactly the same.
Absolutely.
I've been sexually assaulted at a Motel 6, and I've been sexually assaulted at a Hilton.
Well, it doesn't also talk about the facts of sex workers don't get health insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
The benefits that they don't have.
Yeah,
right.
Could you put on your resume?
Right. If you say that last 3 years, I was a prostitute on Aurora, and then use that as experience for a job that pays a 9 to 5. No, you can't.
No, there's no medical. Are you getting free medical? Are you getting free mental health? Because let me tell you, it's hard to do that work. So
there may be people who argue that you should, because it's work and it's employment. It should have benefits and it should be able to go on your resume.
But is it really ever going to? Let's be realistic.
I would say the people that argue that are in a naive space not to understand the violence that takes place for the women that are being exploited. And I think that's the strongest point, right? It takes the violence out of it. And at some level, at some point, that comes along with it, right? I mean, regardless. And I also have to say something, and I want to just be very direct about this. Oftentimes when some women go out there and say, I'm a sex worker, I'm empowered by that, they are also stifling their internal traumas from their childhoods and will be identified at some point down the road as well. I don't know how many women show up in these spaces and feel empowered. Yeah. And so when we misdiagnose that or say words like sex worker, and toss that around, you're taking a lot away from the women who are survivors in these spaces. Right?
Yeah.
I love that phrase, that sex work, you're removing the violence.
You're removing the violence from it.
I think that's a fantastic
You're totally removing the violence
it.
from it. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The trauma, that's one thing that we all have in common. Whether you're this high class, I don't know what person, you're high class, or whether you're on Aurora, the trauma is exactly the same. You still have to look in the mirror. You still have to wonder what this weirdo is going to ask you to do. Yeah. You still have to do it with a smile on your face. And no woman can tell me that is empowering. Yeah. At the end of the day, when you're all alone and you're in your own thoughts and you're thinking about things, that's not empowering.
The level of shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think yesterday somebody said, why, careful about shaming the Johns, right? Or something like that. Careful about shaming the Johns. It's like, what in the world shame do you think it feels like for the survivors? Yeah. That shame is something that they can't wipe away. The Johns are making a choice to go out there and buy sex. And most often, as you've heard now, from a minor. Yeah. We should be shaming them in these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Then that might be the most powerful force, more than law enforcement, more than the legal system, maybe, to stop things. Yeah.
Think about it. If you made it difficult on the Johns, if a John was, I'll give you a story. One time I traveled a lot when I was in life, and I was in Virginia. And I don't know what had happened, but the cops came busting down the door, right? And they pulled him to the side. I knew as soon as they pulled him to the side, I was going to go to jail, and he wasn't going to go to jail, right? And so they pulled him to the side, and he basically told on me. He was like, she's a working girl, da-da-da-da. He was so scared. He worked, mind you, this is Virginia, close to D.C. He was so scared to have his car towed, because it was a company car, that they told him, well, if you tell on her, then we won't tow your car and we'll take her to jail. I ended up doing like 117 days in a Virginia jail.
How old were you?
I was adult then. I was probably like 20 something, maybe 28. I got out, and he had called my phone like 100 times, and he was like, I'll give you $1,000. Sorry for the inconvenience. I just couldn't have my wife know, and I couldn't have my company car towed. Now imagine if we were doing the right thing, and we kept make it difficult for them.
Yes, yeah.
Make it difficult for them.
Yeah.
Well, and then I think that sometimes when you don't make it difficult for them and they get away, then they go out there and figure out how they can get away with it again and get away with it again. Then they start to feel like, ooh, look at me. I can go out there. I can have any girl I want. I can exploit this one again because I'm untouchable, right? Yeah. And think about that messaging. Think about the messaging. There's another message that I think is really important is that how it makes the women feel, right? Like that's the messaging that we're not going to hold these Johns accountable, but yet the women have to be. Like, so then yet again, you're just disposable. You don't matter. You mean nothing, right? And so eventually they just give into the life. And that's understandable if that's all you're told you're worth or shown you're worth, and especially if it comes from government or policy or police, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of business people that listen to your podcast, people that own businesses, and it doesn't take a genius to understand supply and demand. So, like, if we cut that out, I don't think it's ever just going to go away, because it is what it is. But, we have created, first of all, we're working in a broken system, which makes this very difficult. And we have created a society where it's like, social rite to passage for a dad, bachelor parties and stuff like that. This is how you grow into be a man. But then the girl that does it, you're a slut, you're a whore, you're a horrible person. But he gets put on this pedestal because he did that. So this goes so much deeper than just, we have to stop trafficking. No, we have to stop how we teach our sons, how we teach our daughters. We have to rethink this whole process.
That gets back to the sex work conversation, and something that I want to add. If you can convince yourself that, like, this woman is doing this by choice and she's empowered by it, then you can justify your actions.
Absolutely.
And women can justify their lives staying in that position by also convincing themselves that they're empowered and that they're making a choice. So at the end of the day,
that's a way to protect themselves too, right? At the end of the
it's commercialization of female bodies, no matter what, even the small group that is maybe making a choice to do this. There's still, I think that there's still something just fundamentally wrong with commercialization of human bodies, of female bodies across the board, no matter what.
I totally agree.
Absolute exploitation.
Totally
One last question for you guys. What are your recommendations for people who care about this issue? They don't have experience in it. They want to help, they want to support, they want to be engaged. How would you guys suggest being involved?
We are as raw as they get for two people that serve in this space. And so we offer you to come walk alongside us. We offer you to ask us questions. The More We Love is a community. We call it The More We Love for a reason. The we part is really important to us, right? Educate yourselves, ask questions. If you see something, say something. That's like an old school saying, but it matters, right? It really does matter. And I think that the thing is that we have created a really cool concept in a program called the 10 to 1, right? And we believe
10 to 1?
The 10 to 1 program, right? And it's our constant program. It's our walking alongside people that need us most. And what we have a call to action to our community right now, because we believe in solving this and even in homelessness, right? It's going to take a whole of community approach. It's all of us. And so our 10 to 1 program is a call to the community and saying, hey, what are you good at, right? Are you a nurse? Do you like to drive people? Are you somebody who's a survivor and can lay with a woman for a night? What does this look like for you? Are you a teacher who could come and tutor somebody. And so we have a call to action to email The More We Love at Kristine@themorewelove.org. I'm sure you can provide that information and tell us what you love to do. And then you know what we're going to do? We're going to get you involved, and we'll, it's safe, and you'll have your training and all of those things, and as safe as it feels for you to be able to serve in these spaces. But it's important that we enact a whole of community approach to this, because it's not just one's responsibility, right? It's not a survivor-led organization's responsibility. It's not the police officer's responsibility. It's all of us. And we together.
Yeah, and it can be something so little, like there's a survivor right now that's doing well, that's thriving, but we all know that we don't live a livable wage. You know what I mean?
No, yeah,
and she's doing fantastic, and she, she makes just enough money to cover her bills, and she wants to get her 2 toddlers some bikes. Like being able to be able to have a list of people that you could call and say, hey, you got some bikes laying around? You got, school time's coming. You got school supplies? Because I was in the library. I have 4 kids. And so Christmas time and those times came, like, even if I was trying to get out, I was like, well, I got to go back because I got to make sure there's Christmas presents. I got to, your mind always goes back to that. But when you have a community that's like, no, I got 2 bikes in the thing, or no, I can get that for you. Like just those little things. I think people want to help so bad that they overthink it, and you don't have to overthink it. We're family. Let's just help
once you start to show up, then it expands it.
Yeah. But I do want to say something when we talk about the word choice. I think we throw that word around a lot. I think we use it loosely, and choice is a thing of privilege. And I think my best way to describe this is like you're hungry, right? And you're driving down the street, and there's a McDonald's, there's a Burger King, there's a KFC, there's a Panda Express, there's all these restaurants, right? So that's a choice. You can choose one of those things to eat. When there's a survivor, like I'll use me as an example, 12 years old, eating out of a trash can, and then somebody tells me I can go make $100, there's no choice there. Yeah. So we have to be really careful when we use that word. Choice is a thing of privilege that not everybody gets.
And that's what's tied to that word, sex worker.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what's tied
a real
to that
choice.
Yes, that's it. Is this a choice?
Yeah. Or is it essentially coerced choice, which is not a choice at all?
Yeah. If your kids are hungry and there's no way to feed them,
it's not a choice.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So but again, we work in a system that's broken. So it goes deeper. We have to fix the system.
Thank you. Anything else that you want to add?
I think the other thing that I would like to add is that there is a hunger for people to want to be educated on this, and there's a lot of wonderful trainings out there. And if anybody does want access to those or some information, we'd be happy to provide that as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys both so much for joining me today.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'm so moved by the experiences and insights that SarahAnn shared from her life, and from the incredible work that both Kristine and SarahAnn from The More We Love are doing to help women out of this space and have lives that are restored and healthy and happy and flourishing. I learned so much from this conversation with them. I hope you did as well. Thank you for watching this episode of Restorations, and don't forget to subscribe and follow wherever you're watching or listening so you don't miss the next episode.